Nietzsche didn't perceive marriage as a safe harbor, but rather as a carefully adorned trap set by the era's moral standards. For this philosopher, the union between man and woman, far from being a natural path, often represented a pact of convenience sustained by tradition, religion, and the fear of solitude. Throughout his reflections, Nietzsche maintained that marriage was rarely connected to authentic love. It almost invariably emerged from needs for social status, financial security, or submission to norms that imprisoned the individual. What if marriage, so celebrated as the pinnacle of maturity, was actually a sign of weakness, conformity, and escape from one's own individuality? What if, by marrying, a man surrendered his creative force to a routine that slowly suffocated him? Nietzsche wasn't proposing the destruction of love, but rather the rescue of its true intensity, free from social contracts and romantic illusions. His critique serves as an invitation to the courage of living without the crutches that society imposes. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey. Nietzsche observed marriage not as a sublime gesture of love, but as a socially constructed institution designed to keep people within certain invisible bars. From early on, men were educated to believe that marrying was the natural goal of adult life, the rite of passage that would validate their honor, masculinity, and even their usefulness within society. But for Nietzsche, all of this was nothing but an illusion. Marriage, in its traditional form, didn't liberate anyone. On the contrary, it imprisoned man's vitality, draining his creative impulse and subjecting him to rules that weren't his own, but inherited from a morality he didn't choose. Imagine a man who marries because it was what everyone expected. He follows the script: engagement, wedding, children, home ownership, the routine that continues like a straight line until old age. In society's eyes, this man is respectable, but inside, perhaps he carries a suffocating sensation of having lost himself. With each repeated morning, each identical dinner, he realizes that life has transformed into a passionless, theatrical performance. This is exactly what Nietzsche denounced: marriage as mechanical repetition, not as creation. Nietzsche was a thinker of intense life, of self-overcoming and refusal to surrender to the herd. Marriage, according to him, was almost always a pact with mediocrity. It didn't mean loving more, but rather loving less. For true love is risky, full of uncertainties, demanding courage to surrender and transform oneself. Marriage, in its traditional form, attempts to domesticate love, transforming it into something predictable, lukewarm, regulated. Society wants love to be a calm force because wild love is too dangerous. It might make someone abandon everything, challenge conventions, break structures. In Nietzsche's era, religion's weight reinforced this prison even further. Marriage was viewed as a sacred duty, indissoluble, unquestionable. There was no space for man to choose freely, only to obey. And here lies a crucial point. Nietzsche saw marriage as one of the greatest expressions of herd morality, that morality which standardizes, which prevents the individual from living his own life in the name of obedience to the collective. But what happens when a man allows himself to be imprisoned by this pact? He begins trading his creative potential for stability. He stops taking risks, stops seeking the new, stops listening to his own inner voice. With each silent renunciation, he becomes smaller, more predictable, more fragile. Until one day, when he looks back, he realizes that his entire life was molded by others' expectations. Nietzsche wasn't writing to discourage love, but to alert about the prison of conventions. He knew that marriage often doesn't spring from a free choice, but from a deep fear of solitude, of not being recognized, of not fitting in. And fear is a terrible counselor. A man driven by fear doesn't create, doesn't dare, doesn't live. He merely survives within invisible bars. The prison of marriage, therefore, isn't only in external rules, but in the soul that accommodates itself. Nietzsche saw in this accommodation a symptom of decadence, the man who prefers security to freedom, routine to intensity, conformism to creation. The great question is that the prison is too comfortable. And it's precisely this comfort that deceives, that gives the sensation of stability when it actually slowly robs life's flame. Perhaps that's why Nietzsche said, in a provocative tone, that men should never marry, not because they shouldn't love, but because marriage in its social form rarely preserves love's greatness. What it preserves is order, custom, repetition. And here arises the first provocative question. Do many men marry because they truly desire to love, or because they're afraid to face the freedom of being alone? Nietzsche always distrusted the beautiful words that society uses to mask its intentions. Among all of them, few were as manipulated as the word love. For him, what we call love in traditional marriage was, most of the time, just a domesticated, impoverished, and convenient version of the true sentiment. Love, in its most intense form, is vertigo, risk, tempest. Marriage tends to transform it into a cohabitation contract, an association of interests, a perpetual peace agreement that kills precisely what made the heart beat stronger. We must ask, what do we seek in love? Many men and women don't seek the abyss of surrender, but rather a soft cushion against solitude. They want someone to prepare dinner, someone to wait for them at home, someone to accompany them so they don't have to face the silence of their own lives. This is what Nietzsche calls comfortable love, a relationship that serves as anesthesia against emptiness. This love doesn't elevate, doesn't awaken, doesn't drag to dangerous heights. It merely rocks like a lullaby. But true love, according to Nietzsche, shouldn't lull to sleep. It should ignite. It's an encounter that forces us out of ourselves, that launches us into the unknown. To truly love is to expose oneself to the risk of suffering, of losing, of transforming to the point of no longer recognizing oneself. It's accepting that the other isn't property, but a mysterious force that can both elevate and destroy us. The problem is that society fears this type of love. It's unstable, unpredictable, insubordinate. And what collective morality most desires is stability, predictability, control. Therefore, marriage emerges as a kind of golden cage. You enter it for love, but soon love is transformed into habit, into routine, into repetition. The passionate kiss becomes a hurried greeting before work. The nighttime conversation transforms into silence before the television. The desire to conquer is traded for the indifference of one who already considers himself an owner. Nietzsche saw in this process a form of betrayal of love itself, for true love knows no contracts. It doesn't sustain itself on promises of eternity. Those who truly love know that each day is a new conquest, a new risk, a new possibility of losing and gaining simultaneously. Marriage, conversely, tries to eliminate risk. It creates the illusion that once yes is said, nothing more can change. But what is love without the possibility of change? What is love without the danger of loss? It's a love that ceased being love because it lost the fire of uncertainty. We can imagine, for example, a young couple taken by passion. In the beginning, each encounter is an explosion of senses. Each word is charged with intensity. But upon marrying, little by little, they begin trading risk for security. They plan bills, discuss who goes to the market, divide tasks like two partners in a small domestic enterprise. And love, it still exists perhaps, but diluted, transformed into habit, into camaraderie, into calm affection. Nietzsche would see in this the slow death of what was most precious. To love is to be willing to dance over the abyss, he might say. But those who marry almost always desire the opposite. firm ground, a routine that distances the abyss. And here emerges his critique. The man who seeks only comfort in love will never know the true greatness of loving. He will live, yes, a more tranquil life, but also a shallower one. Nietzsche wasn't preaching the end of relationships, but their reinvention. He believed that love should be creative, not conservative, a field of forces that propels the individual to overcome himself, not to shrink. This requires rare courage, the courage to live a love that may end, that may bring pain, but that, while it lasts, is living flame. What is preferable then? Living decades beside someone in peace but without flame, or living loves that perhaps won't last forever, but that reveal who we really are? The answer for Nietzsche is clear. Better the risk of intensity than the certainty of monotony. Better to love like a volcano, even if it extinguishes one day, than to spend an entire life warmed by dying embers. Marriage, by transforming love into comfort, may seem like a practical solution. But the price is high. It's the price of freedom, of passion, of vitality. It's the price of transforming dance into march, flight into walk, flame into ash. And you? When you think of love, do you seek the security of a well-organized house, or do you accept the risk of losing yourself and transforming? Are you willing to live love as a dangerous adventure, or do you prefer the peace of custom? Perhaps Nietzsche's question wasn't just why men should never marry, but something more radical. Can true love survive within an institution made to render it comfortable, predictable, and obedient? To understand Nietzsche's critique of marriage, we must dive into one of the central ideas of his philosophy, the will to power. Unlike those who reduce life to a search for pleasure or happiness, Nietzsche believed that the fundamental impulse of human beings is to expand, affirm themselves, create, overcome themselves, in other words, exercise power. But not power in the vulgar sense of dominating others merely for domination's sake, but in the deeper sense, the power to affirm one's own vital force, to give form to existence's chaos, to transform oneself and the surrounding world. Now, let's think about marriage. What does it do with this impulse? In theory, it could be a union of forces, two individuals who meet to grow together, to potentiate each other, to create something greater than each could in isolation. This would be perhaps a marriage worthy of Nietzsche's free spirit. But in practice, what he observed was different. Marriage, in its social and religious form, almost always becomes a power game, a battlefield where one imposes and the other yields. How many marriages aren't in reality a silent war, the man who commands and the woman who obeys? Or conversely, the woman who controls and the man who nullifies himself. In these homes, the will to power isn't used to create, but to subdue. It's a force that should lift, but ends up crushing. Nietzsche saw in this a corruption of life's true potency. Moreover, the man who marries out of fear of solitude or social pressure already enters this union in a weakened form. He isn't affirming his will to power. He's yielding to society's will to power, which forces him to follow the script of the good citizen, the good husband, the family man. And by doing this, he already begins to give up his own creative force. But there's something even more subtle. Marriage, by transforming into routine, creates a static equilibrium between the two partners. Each knows his place, each fulfills his function, and life follows in a straight line. Only that for Nietzsche, true life is never static. It's tension, conflict, overcoming. The will to power isn't satisfied with equilibrium. It always seeks new challenges, new abysses to conquer. Marriage, by neutralizing this tension, can transform into an anesthetic that puts the will to power to sleep. An example: a creative man, full of ideas, full of desires, marries. Initially, he feels that his wife inspires him. that together they can build something grandiose. But over time, concern with the house's sustenance, with bills, with the children's routine, begins consuming his energy. He works no longer to create, but to maintain. The flame that moved him extinguishes, replaced by the obligation to guarantee the home's stability. What seemed like a union of forces becomes a prison where his will to power atrophies. Nietzsche would say that true love should be an arena of creative forces. Two beings who, upon meeting, don't seek to nullify themselves but to challenge each other, who don't look for comfort but intensity, who aren't afraid of losing themselves because they know that only those who lose themselves can transform. But marriage, molded by herd morality, doesn't want intensity, it wants security. It doesn't want creative conflict, it wants forced harmony. It doesn't want the flame that illuminates and destroys, it wants the lamp that never extinguishes. And the result is a weakened man, an imprisoned woman, and a love that, instead of elevating, corrodes. Marriage, for Nietzsche, is the place where the will to power goes to die. But attention, it's not about saying that every relationship is condemned to this death. What Nietzsche questions is the institutionalized form of marriage, which imposes fixed roles and transforms life into repetition. A true love, free from social bonds, could indeed be the space for a creative struggle, for mutual overcoming, for growth that doesn't fear risk. The question that remains is, when you unite with someone, are you seeking the intensity of this creative struggle or just the anesthesia of comfort? Are you willing to face the abyss of loving someone who can, at any moment, change, leave, transform you? Or do you prefer to sign a contract that promises eternity, but deep down only hides the slow death of the flame? Nietzsche believed that man should always choose risk, because only in risk does life show its true force. Marriage, by trying to transform risk into security, betrays love's very principle. And that's why he said, perhaps it's better to never marry than to kill the will to power in the name of routine. Nietzsche had horror for the idea of a life reduced to repetition. For him, living was creating, experimenting, affirming existence's chaos with courage. Nothing seemed more decadent to him than life that transforms into a predictable sequence of automatic gestures. And it's precisely this that he saw in the married man, someone who, little by little, loses himself in routine, trading his vital potency for a stability that deep down is just another form of death. The single man, even if alone, even if insecure, maintains before him an open horizon. He can decide to change cities, risk a new profession, surrender to an unexpected love, reinvent himself at every moment. His life is still permeated with uncertainties, and these uncertainties keep him awake in a state of creation. But the married man, in Nietzsche's view, is pressured to be predictable. He must sustain the home, provide stability, follow the already written script, and in this script there's no space for the unexpected. Routine begins innocently, work schedule, dinner, conversation before sleep. But soon it transforms into automatic repetition, always waking at the same time, always saying the same things, always frequenting the same places. Life loses its music and becomes noise. The passion that once moved the man disappears, replaced by small obligations. He stops being a creator to become a maintainer. He stops being force in expansion to become a fixed piece of a system that spins endlessly. Nietzsche saw in this a kind of betrayal of life. For life demands movement, demands overcoming, demands the new, and routine conversely crystallizes. It's not about condemning small repetitions after all. Every human being needs some rhythm. But when routine becomes the center of existence, when it transforms into life's meaning, man dies while alive. We can imagine the typical portrait of this man. He wakes early, not because he desires to, but because he needs to. He leaves for work at something that no longer inspires him, but pays the bills. He returns home tired, sits before the television, eats, sleeps, and the next day repeats. When he looks to the future, he sees no horizons, just more of the same. He still breathes but stopped living. Nietzsche would call this man decadent, not because he's physically weak, but because he renounced existence's intensity. And what's worse, often this man believes he's being responsible. He's proud of maintaining the home, of being stable, of being predictable. Society applauds him, family respects him, the church blesses him, but inside his flame slowly extinguishes. He may not perceive it immediately, but just one instant of silence, one sleepless night, to feel the weight of a life that no longer belongs to him. Nietzsche saw in marriage the motor of this domestication. It's not that women are to blame or that love is impossible. The problem is the social structure that transforms man into a piece of a mechanism. The husband stops being an individual and becomes a function: father, provider, spouse. His identity comes to be defined by these roles and no longer by his creative force. Little by little, he forgets himself. There's, however, an important detail. This forgetting doesn't happen abruptly, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. The man who loses himself in routine doesn't perceive the exact moment when he stopped living for himself. He just gets used to it. And that's the danger. Habit is an invisible prison, a chain so discreet it seems natural. Nietzsche believed that only a shock could awaken someone from this anesthesia. An unexpected event, an overwhelming passion, a radical loss, something that would destroy the illusion of stability. For only in these moments does man realize how asleep he was. Routine, at the same time it protects, also puts to sleep. And those who sleep in life, according to Nietzsche, are already half dead. The question that remains is brutal. How many men today and always lived decades like this, repeating days without realizing they were losing themselves? How many aged without ever experiencing the risk of the new? How many died without ever having truly lived? Nietzsche would say that this is marriage's greatest tragedy. It's not the end of love, but the end of creative life. It's the man who transforms into a shadow of himself, into a guardian of a routine that robs his spirit. That's why he provoked. Better to be alone and at risk than accompanied and asleep. Better to live an unstable but intense life than to guarantee stability at the cost of one's own soul. The question that remains is this: are you living or just repeating? Among all the illusions that humanity cultivates, Nietzsche perceived in romantic love one of the most dangerous. Not because love itself was false or unworthy, but because society had transformed this wild and creative sentiment into a domesticated myth, a promise of eternity that contradicts life's very nature. Marriage, in this sense, was nothing but the institutionalization of this illusion. The idea that desire can be fixed, that passion can be frozen, that fire can be kept lit forever without ever transforming into ash. But Nietzsche, the thinker of becoming, knew that everything in life is movement, change, flux. Nothing remains the same, not even love. The passion that consumes us today, tomorrow, can transform into indifference, friendship, resentment, or hatred. Pretending it will be eternal is a convenient lie, a necessary lie to maintain social order, but still a lie. And why does society insist so much on this fiction? Because true love is too dangerous. It doesn't obey contracts, doesn't bow before signed papers, doesn't respect the logic of private property. True love can unite two beings so intensely that they break with everything around them. It can lead them to abandon families, careers, homelands. It can ignite cities, topple governments, create new values. It's a revolutionary force, and every revolutionary force is intolerable to herd morality. Thus the romantic illusion is created, the idea that love should be meek, eternal, domesticated, that today's passion should be the same tomorrow, in 10 years, until death do us part. Love, which should be living flame, becomes contract. Desire, which should be tempest, becomes routine, and man, who could lose and reinvent himself in love's risk, begins living within a narrative that isn't his, but imposed. Nietzsche saw in this process not just a lie, but decadence. For when love is transformed into romantic illusion, it stops being creative and becomes conservative. It stops opening horizons and begins closing them. The couple, instead of launching into new heights, encloses itself in a promise of eternal repetition. The forever becomes a sentence, not a celebration, and here lies the greater danger. The man who believes in this illusion doesn't just deceive himself about love, he deceives himself about life itself. He begins believing that everything can be static, that movement can be stopped, that flux can be frozen. He forgets that living is changing, is losing, is dying and being reborn constantly. And by forgetting this, he becomes incapable of facing impermanence. Nietzsche wasn't preaching cynicism. He wasn't saying, love is a lie, therefore reject it. On the contrary, he valued love in its most intense form. But precisely because he valued it, he refused its falsification. For him, truly loving was accepting that this love may not last, that it may transform, that it may even destroy. It was living love as if it were eternal, but without clinging to the promise of eternity. Let's think of a simple example. Two lovers meet and live an overwhelming passion. At the height of feeling, they promise eternal love. But years pass, circumstances change, and that fire extinguishes. What remains then? Many choose to cling to the promise, insist on the illusion, artificially prolong what has already died. They live together, but without life, trapped in the shadow of a love that no longer exists. Others, however, have the courage to recognize the change and move forward, even if it hurts, even if it seems like a betrayal of the promise. Nietzsche would admire the latter because they don't cling to illusion. They prefer hard truth to comfortable lie. The romantic illusion, therefore, not only imprisons men in marriage, but also prevents them from understanding life in its essence. Those who believe that love should last forever aren't prepared for death, for loss, for inevitable transformation. They live in fear that the enchantment will end, and this fear, paradoxically, accelerates the end. Nietzsche would ask, what is more noble, maintaining an empty marriage just to sustain the appearance of eternal love, or living an intense love that exhausts itself but transforms us forever? The herd will say the first is more respectable. The free spirit will say the second is more truthful. The danger of romantic illusion isn't just individual, but collective. A society that lives on illusions creates weak people, incapable of facing impermanence, and weak people are easily manipulated. Marriage, as a promise of eternity, is a tool of social control. It teaches individuals to cling to what dies, to deny change, to fear the new. Here's the Nietzschean challenge: liberate love from illusion's prison, love without contract, love without promise of eternity, love knowing that love may end. Live love like one who dances at the abyss's edge, intensely, dangerously, creatively, for only this love is worthy of life. And you, when you speak of love, are you willing to accept the pain of change, or do you still cling to the comfortable illusion of forever? Could it be that the real danger isn't love's end, but the lie that keeps it artificially alive? After dismantling marriage's illusions, the social prison, domesticated love, suffocating routine, and the myth of eternity, Nietzsche doesn't leave us in emptiness. He wasn't a gratuitous destroyer. His philosophy always sought to open space for something greater, more intense, more affirmative of life. If traditional marriage kills love's flame, then the inevitable question is, what comes after? What remains when one abandons the illusion? Nietzsche's answer isn't simple, but it's clear. Love must be understood as creation. Not creation of children only, as traditional society likes to reduce it, but creation of worlds, of values, of possibilities. Loving someone, for Nietzsche, is recognizing in the other not a mirror of oneself, nor a safe harbor against solitude, but a force that challenges us, that launches us beyond ourselves, that forces us to grow. A true loving encounter, then, isn't a fusion where two become one as romantic illusion wants, but a creative tension between two forces that remain singular. It's like two artists who inspire each other mutually, not to nullify themselves, but to produce something new. Love, in this perspective, is a work in constant becoming, a dangerous dance that never repeats in the same way. Nietzsche would say, to love is to learn to want more life. And wanting more life means accepting change, impermanence, the possibility of loss. Creative love doesn't seek to last forever. It seeks to intensify existence while it lasts. It doesn't promise eternity but offers depth. It doesn't guarantee stability but opens horizons. Now see the difference. In traditional marriage, love is placed at the service of society, of morality, of family, of order. In creative love, life itself is served. The couple doesn't unite to please the church, family, or neighbors, but to explore together the mystery of existing. They don't seek a contract but a movement. They don't desire comfort but transformation. This type of love is rare because it requires courage. It requires that man not hide behind routine, that he not nullify himself in social roles, that he not fear loss. It requires that he be willing to be wounded, to reinvent himself, to risk himself. But it's exactly this risk that makes love something worthy of being lived. Nietzsche invites us to think how many of our relationships are in fact creative, how many lead us to be more, to surpass ourselves, and how many, conversely, imprison us in roles that diminish us. Most men, he said, prefer the second path because it's easier, safer, more comfortable. But the price of this comfort is vitality's death. Living beyond marriage, therefore, doesn't mean living without love. It means living a love that doesn't let itself be captured. A love that doesn't need signed papers, external blessings, promises of eternity. A love that suffices in risk, in intensity, in creation. We can imagine this love as a work of art. Each encounter is a brushstroke, each conflict is a new color, each reconciliation is an unexpected trace. The painting is never ready, it's always under construction. And precisely because of this, it's alive. Marriage, in its traditional form, wants to frame the painting before time. Fix it, hang it on the wall as if it were definitive. Creative love, conversely, tears the frame because it knows that life doesn't fit in frames. Nietzsche, with his philosophy of eternal return, would ask us, would you like to live this same life, this same love, infinite times, exactly as it is? If the answer is no, then perhaps what you call love isn't really love, but just habit, illusion, or fear. True love is that which, even knowing it may be brief, you would choose to relive eternally because each instant in it is full of meaning. The man who has courage to live this love doesn't need marriage. He doesn't need contracts, promises, witnesses. His union is sealed not by the state or religion, but by the encounter's intensity. He doesn't seek security. He seeks greatness. He doesn't seek stability. He seeks the flame that transforms him. In the end, when Nietzsche said that men should never marry, perhaps he was telling us something even deeper. Don't kill love with the illusion of security. Don't kill life with eternity's lie. Be strong enough to love as one loves life, without guarantees, without contracts, without fear of losing. To love is to create. To love is to risk oneself. To love is to live the instant as if it were eternal, without needing the lie of forever. Marriage may be a prison. Love, when free, is the greatest form of freedom. And here remains the final question. Do you want a love that accommodates you, or a love that transforms you? Do you want the lukewarm peace of a lifeless routine, or the burning risk of a creative passion? Nietzsche invites us to choose. But beware, the true choice requires courage. For to truly love is always to dance at the abyss's edge. What city are you watching from? Comment down below.